In the small village of Windmill, Malawi, a young boy named William Kamkwamba dared to dream. With nothing but a battered library book and scraps of metal from a junkyard, he built a windmill that would change his village forever. People laughed, calling him crazy, but William didn't stop. He believed that if he could catch the wind, he could catch hope. Under pouring rain, William and his friend Gilbert set up the windmill in an open field. The blade spun faster and faster until light. For the first time, a tiny bulb flickered in the darkness, and the people of Wim saw hope shining through the rain. Word of the boy who harnessed the wind spread beyond Malawi. He spoke at TED Global, inspiring the world with his story. His invention reached Hollywood, becoming a film that showed millions what one dream could achieve. But William never forgot his roots. He returned to Wim, teaching others how to catch the wind, lighting up homes, and bringing water to dry fields. What began with scraps and a dream turned into light and life for an entire village. The wind does not choose who can catch it, William said. Anyone with enough determination can. The scorching heat lingered over the Malawian sky. The sun blazed mercilessly, scorching the cornfields and cracking the once fertile soil. Wim, a small village that relied on corn harvests, was now devastated by a long drought. The wells dried up, the corn leaves withered, and the ground seemed to scream for water. Amid this harshness, William Kamkwamba, a 14-year-old boy, helped his father work the fields every day. He was the only son in his family, with 6 younger sisters who were still small. His lean body looked weary, but he kept swinging the hoe over the hardened ground. Corn porridge became the only meal they could have each day, and even that was often not enough. William's mother tried to stretch every portion as best as she could, while his siblings sat in the corner of their house, holding back their hunger. Tiamike, William's youngest sister, was born right in the midst of this hunger crisis. His mother often cried in silence, seeing the baby, Tiamike, have to drink thin, diluted milk because there wasn't enough food to produce breast milk. Many nights, William lay awake, listening to his siblings' rumbling stomachs and Tiamike's faint cries, still too young to understand the harsh reality. One morning, William heard terrible news. His parents could no longer afford to pay his school fees. At just 14, he had to drop out, while his friends were still sitting in class, listening to the teacher talking about the world beyond their village. Disappointed but not defeated, William decided to visit a small, dusty library in his village. The building was almost forgotten, filled with dust and rarely visited. The old wooden shelves were lined with worn-out books, some of them with torn covers. William didn't care. To him, these books were a gateway to a broader world. There, he met the librarian, Mrs. Edith Sicelo. "Why do you come here? Nobody reads these books anymore," Mrs. Sicelo asked with a small smile. "Because here, I can find answers," William replied with bright eyes. Every day, William would come to the library. He read anything he could find about plants, farming methods, and simple machines. But one day, while rummaging through the dusty stacks, he found a book titled Using Energy. Amid the dusty piles, William pulled out the book. The cover was worn, but the pages were still intact. Inside, there were simple diagrams explaining how to generate electricity using wind power. William carefully read through each page, his curiosity growing. He found a diagram of a large wind turbine that could generate electricity. There was a sketch showing how the blades rotated when the wind blew, turning a generator to produce electric current. He stopped at a page that showed a small house illuminated by a single light bulb, all powered by the wind. What if the wind could save this village from darkness? He whispered to himself, staring at the page. Eager to test his newfound knowledge, William started a small experiment at home. He took an old radio battery that had been stored away in a cupboard and a small and used light bulb. Using makeshift wires, he connected the battery to the bulb. As the current flowed, the bulb flickered for a moment before going dark. A wide smile spread across William's face. Though it was brief, it was the first light he had ever generated himself. His younger siblings giggled, thinking William was just playing around, but William looked at the small bulb with renewed hope. "Imagine if we could light the entire house, not just this tiny bulb," he said with a determined voice. However, not everyone shared William's enthusiasm. His father, exhausted from working the fields, saw William's small experiments as a waste of time. "Do you think reading books will bring us food? Look around, everyone is working hard, and you're just reading." His father scolded him with a firm tone. William lowered his head, clutching the using energy book. "I'm not playing around, Dad. I'm learning," he replied quietly. In the village, some people began to think William was crazy. They laughed at him when he spoke about wind-generated electricity. "You think you can catch the wind with scrap metal? That dream is too big for a boy like you," scoffed one of the neighbors with a mocking laugh. One afternoon, as William carried the book from the library and sat in front of his house, a few children and passing villagers mocked him. "Trying to be a professor? Huh," jeered a young man from the village. "That book's so old. How can it make electricity?" William didn't respond, but in his heart, he vowed, "I'll prove you all wrong." Despite the ridicule, William never gave up. Every day after visiting the library, he would stand in the cornfield, watching the wind blow and the leaves sway. To him, the wind wasn't just moving air, it was an answer of hope. One night, as a strong breeze swept over the dry cornfield, William stood amidst the swirling dust, looking at the wind with unwavering determination. "I know it can work," he whispered each time the wind blew harder. In his mind, he envisioned large blades spinning, producing enough electricity to light up the entire village. The sky over Windmill village glowed with hues of orange and crimson as the sun began to sink below the horizon. In the midst of cracked and dry soil, a teenage boy walked alone, his back slightly hunched under the weight of old scrap metal and broken fans he had gathered from the dump site. In his right hand, he held tightly onto a worn-out book titled Using Energy. Dust rose behind his footsteps as the villagers watched him with puzzled looks. Some children pointed at him, laughing and whispering. "Look, it's William, searching for gold in the trash," one of them shouted. "Maybe he's building an airplane out of junk," added another, followed by bursts of laughter. William only gave a small smile. His eyes showed no doubt. To others, it was trash, but to him, it was the future. "The wind will turn, and I will catch it," he whispered softly, as if speaking to himself. Next to his modest home, William piled up all the scrap he had collected. It wasn't a real workshop, just a patch of hard ground with a tattered tarp roof that had holes in several spots. Rusty iron rods were scattered, old copper wires coiled in the corner, and broken plastic fans stacked on top of rotting wooden planks. Every single day, under the blazing sun or through light rain, he worked tirelessly. His hands connected wires, cut up plastic fragments, and assembled old bicycle dynamos. Small cuts often appeared on his fingers, with blood tracing thin lines on his hands. But William never stopped. "If not now, then when?" he whispered while tying copper wires with broken plastic pieces he found in the trash. One day, as William was assembling a small dynamo in his makeshift workshop, heavy footsteps approached. "William," his father's voice echoed, heavy and filled with frustration. William turned, his hands still gripping the rusted iron pipes. "You think this is going to feed us?" his father shouted, his voice sharp and cutting. He pointed angrily at the pile of scrap metal in the corner. William stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Look around you. People are out working the fields to survive, and you're here playing with junk," his father continued, his voice rising. William clenched the iron pipe tighter, his eyes staring straight at the dirt. "This is not just junk, Father. This is the future," he replied softly, barely audible. His father laughed bitterly. "The future? You think the wind will feed us?" William said nothing, but in his heart, he swore that the wind would bring light. not just to his home, but to the entire village. When night fell and the fields turned dark, William returned home with his clothes covered in dust and his hands scarred from the day's work. His mother, who was preparing corn porridge over a small fire, looked at William with a gentle smile. "You've worked hard, my son. Keep going," she whispered as she wiped the sweat from his brow with a damp cloth. Sometimes, when his father was out in the fields, his mother would help William clean the scrap metal behind the house. "Aren't you afraid Father will be angry?" William asked while brushing the dust off the copper wire. His mother smiled warmly, patting his shoulder. "I'm more afraid of seeing you give up," she replied, her voice soft but firm. In her aging eyes, there was hope that never faded. It was as if, behind the pile of rusty iron, she could already see a brighter future. A few days later, William heard rumors from the villagers about an abandoned workshop at the edge of town. That evening, after the sun had set and the streets were empty, William and Gilbert snuck inside. Through the broken wooden fence, they crawled under the gaps and entered the shadowy building. Inside, amidst piles of rusted iron, they found what felt like treasure. A car alternator, dusty but still intact. Long copper wires, coiled up and covering cobwebs. An old car battery, slightly rusted but still solid. "If we can fix this, we can make lights turn on in our house," William whispered, his voice brimming with determination. Gilbert nodded, this time without any doubt. They brought the alternator to Mr. Bonda, the old mechanic at the edge of the village. Under the dim light of his small workshop, Mr. Bonda patiently taught William how to repair the alternator and understand the basics of electrical current. "These cables are still good. Use them for your experiments, son," he said, handing over a few spools of copper wire. In Mr. Bonda's eyes, there was a glimmer of admiration and hope. "I've never seen a kid as stubborn as you," he chuckled softly. A few weeks later, William and Gilbert went to the city market to find more scrap. Amidst the tightly packed stalls, they saw a large diesel generator roaring loudly, powering the lights of small kiosks. Its cables were neatly connected, and the bulbs in the stalls shone brightly. "Look at that, Gil. That machine is making electricity," William whispered, his eyes fixed on the machine. Gilbert nodded, equally mesmerized. The generator hummed with life, its mechanical parts moving in unison. The man guarding the generator noticed them staring too long. "Hey, this isn't a toy kid," the man scolded, his voice gruff. William just smiled gently. "I just want to understand how it works," he replied calmly. That morning, the wind blew gently through the village of Wim, swaying the dry leaves that clung stubbornly to the barren cornfields. William stood in front of his small workshop, the place he called the headquarters of his dream. Inside, old scrap metal, rusty wires, and plastic fan blades were neatly arranged, despite their worn and rusted condition. Every time he stepped inside, William always imagined the workshop as a grand factory with machines spinning, generating light that would illuminate the entire village. Today, he whispered to himself, today, we will begin to catch the wind. Gilbert arrived earlier than usual, carrying a roll of copper wire they had found at the flea market last week. His hands were dirty, but his eyes were sparkling. "I got a long wire this time," he said proudly with a smile. William patted his shoulder. "Good, we're going to need a lot," he replied as he took the coil from Gilbert's hands. Inside the workshop, they began to work. Sweat poured down their faces. Dust flew every time they hammered the iron pipes or cut through the plastic fan blades. Main frame. William carefully connected the iron pipes he collected from the junkyard. He inspected each joint closely, making sure nothing was loose. Fan blades. The car fan they had found weeks ago was now sharpened, its surface smoothed out, and its edges cut neatly to be lighter. Every time he spun the blades with his hands, William could hear the faint whisper of the wind passing through. Alternator. The old car alternator they found at Mr. Banda's workshop was now neatly mounted. Its wires were connected to a bicycle dynamo, while Gilbert made sure everything was set up properly. If the wind blows strong enough, These blades will spin, the dynamo will work, and electricity will flow, William explained with bright eyes. After weeks of working tirelessly, they were finally ready for the first test. On a windy morning, William and Gilbert lifted the turbine frame onto a wooden cart. The wheels creaked under the weight, but they didn't care. With each step, their hearts pounded faster. "The wind is good today," Gilbert said, slightly out of breath. William nodded. "Today, we're going to light the lamp," he replied confidently. They arrived at an open field on the edge of the village, where the wind blew stronger than usual. The place was vast and empty, surrounded only by dry grass and withering trees. Carefully, they erected the turbine frame. The old metal groaned, the ropes securing it tightened, and the wires were connected to a small light bulb they had planted in the ground. The first gust of wind blew gently. The blades began to move, spinning slowly, then faster. The rusty metal vibrated, and the alternator began to hum softly. "Look, it's spinning," shouted Gilbert, his face full of excitement. William smiled widely. "Now, we wait for the light," he whispered, his eyes locked on the small light bulb. But second by second passed, and the bulb remained dark. No light appeared. From a distance, laughter erupted. A few village children watched from behind the trees. "Do you think old metal can replace a real generator?" shouted one of them. "Maybe he's trying to build an airplane from junk." Another chimed in, followed by bursts of laughter. William did not move, his eyes fixed on the unlit bulb. Slowly, he took a deep breath and lowered his head. Gilbert patted his shoulder gently. "Maybe next time, Will," he whispered softly. But William did not give up. He grabbed his notebook, scribbled something down, and looked at Gilbert. "We'll fix it. We'll try again," he whispered with determination. That night, raindrops drizzled softly on the tin roof of his house. William sat alone at his small desk, the diagram of the wind turbine spread out before him. The glow of a tiny candle flickered gently, illuminating the worn-out paper filled with scribbles and hand-drawn notes. Amidst the sound of rain hitting the roof, William murmured softly, "Could a boy like me really catch the wind?" His voice was almost drowned out by the rain, but his mother, who had been standing quietly at the door, heard him. She walked over and sat beside William, gazing at the paper filled with diagrams. "Why aren't you asleep yet, son?" she asked gently. William bowed his head. "Sometimes I doubt. Mom, maybe they're right. Maybe this scrap metal will never work." His mother smiled warmly, placing her hand on William's shoulder. "The wind does not choose who can catch it, son. Anyone who is determined enough can do it." Those words reignited William's spirit. Even as the rain continued to drizzle, his eyes shone brightly once again. The next morning, the light rain still drizzled over Wim. The sky was gray, and the sound of rain washed over the rusted tin roofs. Inside his small workshop, William stared at the iron frame of the wind turbine that had failed to spin the day before. Scrap metal and copper wires were still scattered in the corner of the room, but his eyes were gleaming. "Today, we'll try again," he murmured. The workshop door opened slowly. Gilbert appeared, soaked by the rain but with a wide smile. "In the rain like this?" he asked, surprised. William nodded with firm resolve. "The wind keeps blowing even in the rain, Gil," he answered confidently. They worked under the rain. There was no roof, no shelter, just two young men raising the iron frame in the middle of an open field. Turbine frame. The rusty metal was erected with makeshift ropes, standing tall under the pouring rain. Fan blades. Installed carefully, bolts tightened even as their hands trembled from the cold. Alternator. Connected with copper wires, fastened more neatly and securely. "Are you sure this will work?" asked Gilbert, shivering. William smiled with confidence. "I'm not just sure. I know," he replied firmly. The sky grew darker. The wind blew stronger. The blades began to spin slowly, creaking amidst the heavy rain. The faint hum of electricity started to whisper. From a distance, some villagers stood under makeshift umbrellas, watching the crazy experiment. "That boy is stubborn," murmured an old man. "He'll get sick before he succeeds," added another. But William did not hear them. His gaze was fixed on the turbine that spun faster with each gust of wind. The alternator began to buzz louder. "Now, Will?" asked Gilbert, his voice nearly drowned by the rain. William nodded firmly. "Now," he answered. Gilbert plugged the last wire into the light bulb planted in the ground. Silence. Only the sound of the rain filled the air. William stared at the bulb, whispering a prayer in his heart. "Please, let this work," he murmured softly. The next moment, a tiny flicker appeared inside the bulb. It was faint at first, barely a pulse. But slowly the light grew stronger. Yellow, soft and steady. In the middle of the drizzle, that small light shone brightly, illuminating the puddles around it. William and Gilbert stood there, then burst into laughter under the rain. "We did it, Gil! We did it!" shouted William. Gilbert cheered as well. "I can't believe it. It's shining. The light is shining." The next morning, sunlight peeked shyly through the clouds that hung low after last night's rain. William and Gilbert arrived at their small workshop with smiles that hadn't faded since the night before. In the corner of the workshop, the iron frame of the wind turbine still stood firmly, wet from the remnants of the rain. "Did you see their faces last night?" asked Gilbert, chuckling. William nodded. "They finally saw the light," he replied with absolute confidence. That afternoon, footsteps approached their small workshop. At the entrance, an old man named Mr. Tembo stood, leaning on his wooden cane. You're the one who lit the lamp in the field last night?" he asked with a raspy voice. William nodded. "Yes, sir, that was our first test," he replied humbly. Mr. Tembo gave a thin smile and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a handful of rusty nuts and bolts. "Here, I found these in my field. Maybe you can use them," he said, handing the small pieces of metal to William. William paused for a moment, his eyes welling up with emotion. "Thank you, sir," he whispered softly. Mr. Tembo patted his shoulder. "Keep going, son. I want to see more lights," he whispered before walking away. Day by day, the news about the light that shone during the rain spread across the village. Some farmers began to come to William's little workshop, bringing items they thought were just scrap. Rusty iron pipes from old storage barns, old copper wires from broken machines, old bicycle dynamos that had been lying in their backyards for years. "Can you use this?" asked a farmer, handing him a dusty dynamo. William nodded with excitement. "This is very useful," he replied with a big smile. The items were stacked neatly in the corner of the workshop, arranged carefully, as if each piece was part of a big puzzle that would one day light up the entire village. That evening, William and Gilbert returned to the open field where their small turbine stood. This time, a few villagers gathered, watching from a distance with curiosity. "That boy is truly crazy. But he made it work," murmured a woman holding her baby. Maybe we could have electricity in our homes," replied a man, sharpening his hoe. William stared at the small turbine, spinning slowly in the evening breeze. Behind him, Gilbert carried several additional wires and a new dynamo they found at the flea market. "Are you ready for something bigger?" asked Gilbert, grinning widely. William nodded firmly. "We're going to build something bigger, Gil. We're going to light up the entire village," he answered confidently. The next day, heavy footsteps echoed outside the workshop. The village chief, an elderly man with silver hair, stood there with a stern expression. "I heard you lit up a lamp in the rain," he said plainly. William nodded, slightly nervous. The village chief placed a small wooden box on the table. "These are electrical parts from the old school warehouse. Maybe you can use them," he said briefly before turning around and leaving. Gilbert opened the box carefully, his eyes widening. "Will, these are real copper wires. And this is an old battery, still intact," he exclaimed with excitement. William stared at the blue sky outside the window. "They're starting to believe, Gil. They're starting to believe," he whispered with heartfelt emotion. Not long after the light shone in William's field, the spirit of cooperation began to grow. People who previously doubted him now started coming to his workshop, bringing old wires, discarded fans, and broken parts that they had found. "I found this in my storage. Can you use it?" asked an elderly woman as she handed William a pile of rusty metal. "Every bit helps," William replied, his smile never fading. His small workshop, which used to be empty and isolated, now felt alive. People came and went, offering what they had to support William's dream. Gilbert even began organizing the donations, stacking wires neatly and arranging metal parts by size. One evening, with the help of the villagers, William and Gilbert brought a larger turbine to the village hall. It stood tall and sturdy, its blades spinning as the wind passed through. William had connected wires that led into the hall, and as the sun set, the lights flickered to life. It's glowing," shouted a child who ran around joyfully. Villagers gathered around the glowing lights, eyes wide with amazement. Some clapped, others wept, seeing their village lit up for the first time. Every night since, the village hall became a place where people gathered to talk, share stories, and discuss new ideas under the lights that William and Gilbert had brought to life. As more houses were connected, wind began to transform. Paths that were once dark now glowed with soft light. Children played under street lamps, and elders gathered to share stories late into the evening. "That boy, he really brought light to our village," whispered an old man as he sat under a lamppost, puffing his tobacco. "And it all came from the wind," added another, shaking his head in disbelief. The community spirit grew stronger. People who once doubted now offered support. Farmers donated iron pipes, mothers brought copper scraps, and the village began to change, not just with light, but with hope. The sky over Wim was bright that morning, as if celebrating the progress that was slowly spreading across the village. Small wind turbines now stood firmly in several homes, their blades spinning in unison as the wind blew through the fields. Every night, the glow of light illuminated the narrow paths that once lay in darkness. People began to gather outside their homes, chatting under the street lights, enjoying the kind of illumination they had only imagined before. The news about the boy who harnessed the wind did not stop in Wim. A journalist from a big city who happened to visit the village wrote an article about William. The story spread quickly, drawing the attention of the media, government officials, and international NGOs. The article went viral, spreading to major cities. In the center of Lilongwe, a government official read the story with growing curiosity. A boy from Wim, lighting up his village with just the wind, he murmured in disbelief. Not long after, an invitation letter arrived at William's house. The large blue seal read TED Global Conference, South Africa, at the corner of the envelope. William read the letter with trembling hands. "They invited me, Gil," he whispered, staring at his best friend. Gilbert's eyes widened. "You're going to South Africa? To speak in front of big people?" William nodded, his eyes shining with excitement. "The wind brought us here. Now it will take us even further." Flashes of camera lights greeted William as he stepped onto the large stage in Johannesburg, South Africa. The hall was packed with hundreds of people from all over the world. Innovators, scientists, and community leaders sat neatly, their eyes locked on the stage with curiosity. William stood in front of the microphone, his breath slightly heavy, but his eyes focused straight ahead. "My name is William Kamkwamba. I come from Wim, a small village in Malawi," he began, his voice calm, although his hands trembled slightly. He began to tell his story, how he found the book, Using Energy in the Village Library, how he collected scrap metal, and how he finally lit up the first lamp in his field. "When you catch the wind, you catch the hope," he concluded, greeted by thunderous applause that echoed throughout the room. Some people even shed tears, witnessing how a boy from a small village could change his community's destiny with simple knowledge. After that TED Talk, offers began to pour in. International organizations, universities, and NGOs lined up to offer their support. MIT invited William to study renewable energy technology. Gates Foundation contacted William with a program to expand renewable energy in other African villages. World Bank offered a massive investment to extend the electricity network in Malawi, bringing light to other small villages. William looked at the letters with tears in his eyes. "This isn't just about me, Gil. It's about everyone in this village," he whispered to his best friend. Gilbert nodded. "And you're the one who started it," he replied proudly. However, not all the attention came with good intentions. Some government officials started to visit, bringing proposals and investment offers. "William, this project of yours is big. If you hand it over to the government, we can expand it faster," said one official, handing him a blue folder with bold writing. William looked at it and replied, "This is my village's dream, sir. It's not for sale." A foreign businessman also approached him, carrying a contract for investment. "We can bring electricity to all of Malawi. All you need to do is sign this," he said with a wide smile. William read the contract, his eyes narrowing. "If I sign this, everything will belong to your company." The businessman smiled thinly. "That's business, William." William shook his head slowly. "I started this with the wind. I will keep it for my village." Seeing William standing firm for his dream, the people of Wim grew even more confident. They started collecting money voluntarily to help William continue his project. "We won't let outsiders take this from you," said Mr. Tembo as he handed William a spool of copper wire. Local NGOs also began to arrive, bringing materials like small generators and solar panels to expand the project even further. Every evening, William would teach the village youths at the community hall. He taught them how to connect wires, fix turbines, and understand how wind worked. Under the soft light of simple lamps, the young men began to build their own small turbines, eager to learn. After the international conference, William returned to the small village library where it all began. Mrs. Sicolo, the librarian, welcomed him with a warm smile. "You really did it, son. You brought light," she said, embracing William warmly. William smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. In his hands, he carried several new books that he donated to the library. "I hope another child finds the wind here," he whispered gently. William's inspiration did not stop there. A film studio in Hollywood reached out to him after seeing his TED Talk. They offered him the opportunity to turn his life story into a film. The movie was titled The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and it was released on one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world. William's story inspired millions of people worldwide. When the film was released, William organized a screening at the community hall. A simple projector displayed his journey on a large screen, in front of villagers sitting on woven mats. When the scene of William lighting the first lamp appeared, cheers and applause erupted across the hall. At the end of the screening, William stood up and said, "This is not just my story, it's our story. The wind belongs to all of us."